Do you believe in fate? Do you believe in parallel worlds? Well, you might in 90 minutes' time, because this is a story about both of those things. Welcome to the parallel world of the Stranglers. With over a quarter century of making music, only 2 years of which was part of the punk scene, the Meninblack are a tour de force that makes them the British music industry's most consistent recording act. A hit single every year between 1977 and 92 literally puts them in a league of their own. There have also been 3 changes in the lineup if you include the late Hans Vermling, and more incidents than you could shake a drumstick at. This documentary, accompanied by an exclusive acoustic session, celebrates over 25 years of a band that won't give up and continues its battle cry where others declared their musical amnesty a long time ago. There have been TV shows, yes, documentaries and even books about the Stranglers, but this is a collection of interviews recorded over 10 years, and in their own words, every member, past and present, offers their own brutally frank account of life in an extraordinarily diverse group. I'm Dave Mason, and I've spent a lot of time with the band over the last decade. No voices were changed to protect the innocent, so I give you rock and roll according to the Men in Black, the story of the Stranglers.
The band that began life in a scout hut in Guildford has always been the victim of good and bad fortune, not least the accidents that brought them together in the first place back in 1974. Drummer and band historian Jet Black picks up the story of those auspicious early days.
I'd reached a point in my life where I was in business and I'd got bored and I wanted to play drums professionally. And when I left school, I just found it was absolutely impossible. The climate at the time was that you just had to be the best guy to get a job, you know. It was just impossible. So I got a proper job, you know, like Mum and Dad always said you should do. And I'd done okay in business, but I really got bored with the lifestyle and the repetition, and I wanted to do something just wacky, and it was music. I thought at the time there was music happening all around. I thought, I can do this. This is a whole different thing, you know, when I analysed what music was doing.
You had a fleet of ice cream vans, didn't you?
I did at one stage, yeah. I had a wholesale business, and part of it was wholesaling ice cream. I saw an advert in the paper one day, drummer wanted, and I went up to this audition in London, and it turned out to be a squat in Camden Town, and there were these guys in there who'd just come from Sweden with a band. It was Hugh's band, basically.
When I finished at Bristol, I couldn't bear going to London with nothing, and I'd just come from London anyway, so that to me wouldn't have been anything exciting. So I decided to opt out and defer the decision a bit longer by going to Sweden and starting a PhD degree there, and that's when I started this band, Johnny Socks.
So you went there to study, really?
I did, really. I was there for 2 years in Sweden, and the first person I met was Hans, and he had all these great ideas and great plans, and got me involved in those.
Their drummer had quit, and I did a rehearsal, and they said, "Great, will you play with us?" And I said, "Yeah, great," and this, that and the other. And then I said to them, "Why don't you come and live where I live down in Guildford, because you're living in a squat here and I've got this huge building." I said, "I can put you all up, we've got rehearsal rooms there and everything." So they said, no way, we've got to be here in London, you know, the record company's here, the agents, the publishers, the gigs, everything, you know.
Was Hugh getting anywhere with his band at that point?
Well, although there was something really exciting about the band, it wasn't getting anywhere at all. I mean, it wasn't getting off the ground, it wasn't even getting out the front door.
It was quite unlike anything anyone had ever heard before. It was a bit like Ramones, but with more chords in it. It was a bit like that, very, very fast, high energy.
And it wasn't till I explained to them I actually had an off-licence in Guildford that they suddenly decided it would be a good idea to move to Guildford. So they moved down, and after about 2 or 3 weeks it became obvious that nobody in that band had any real ambition at all apart from Hugh.
Jet's a very forceful character. I mean, you don't forget when you've met him, and that's good. I think that it's good when you meet people that you don't forget you've met them, and they're impressive, you know, and he's definitely an impressive character. I think most of the time I can tell when friendships are formed immediately I meet someone.
And so that really was the beginning of the band. It was us two. who then met JJ, the bass player, quite by accident. I think Hugh picked him up. He was hitchhiking from London, and Hugh picked him up in a van and brought him back to the off-licence one night. We had a drink, and one thing led to another, and we discovered that he had no ambitions at all. He'd never considered taking a career in music. His only ambition at the time was to travel to Japan to study karate. But he had some musical ability. He'd learned classical guitar and he'd written some songs, and so he was quite a musical person. So that was sort of accident number two. And then one day this friend of Hugh's from Sweden turned up. This was Hans Wormling, who you referred to earlier. And he was just a brilliant guitarist, but his ideas were different to ours about how you should go about becoming a band, you know. So that fizzled out and he left, and then eventually Dave came along and joined, and that was really the beginning of the band.
Yes, I remember being unable to find the place, having to find a phone. A friend of mine drove me over. I didn't have a car at the time. And then getting there, and Jet was, what was it? I said, oh yeah, why did you say Jet? He says, because I'm the fastest thing on two legs. And then saying a fairly stocky guy, I think, that doesn't fit somehow, you know, but no, it was, we just had a jam. I think the only thing there was some electric piano or something, which was never my fondest instrument. My left hand in those days was always far more biased towards the organ.
And the minute Dave walked through the door, his attitude just seemed to be right, and we said, play along to this, and he was right there. It was one of those magical things in music. It either it's instant or it isn't, you know, and we knew straight away this is the right man for the job.
They'd had somebody in the day before who was, according to JJ, really into the Doors, people like that, etc., but he couldn't play that well, so I was eventually the one who got the job. So. They had strong personalities, but as to whether I could work with them or not, you don't know until you try. You can know. First impressions sometimes are right, but I've had first impressions that are totally wrong, so I tended not to rely on anything until it had proved itself one way or the other.
You had to work very, very hard for the first couple of years, didn't you, before things really took off?
I had to work very, very hard for the first couple of days, because I think I joined on the Monday or Tuesday and we played Wakefield Festival on the Friday. Learn all the numbers, etc.
So are those days, do you remember those as being just like awful days, or were they good because they were hard?
They were both, really. There were some bad times, but then again, when you look back, the bad times never seem as bad, and the good times always seem better, as a rule. It's the same thing looking back at, well, the band's history as far as I'm concerned. You tend to remember the good times more than the bad.
And the four of you just felt that it gelled together at that point. And basically, you know, the incarnation of the Chiddingfold Chokers at that time, because that's what you were, weren't you?
Oh, you know our history that far back, eh? The Chiddingfold Chokers was like a joke nickname, yes, because we were living in this little village called Chiddingfold. We lived there and we just wrote songs all day, and if we could get a gig, we'd go out and play. And we were in there for about a year, I think. I had a bit of money, kept us going for a while. Eventually things got a bit dire, and we all took sort of part-time jobs that left us all the time we wanted for the main purpose in our life, which was creating music and a band, you know.
So it was basically 110% commitment from day one?
Oh, absolutely. There was no question. We weren't going to do anything else in life but get this band happening, you know.
Many of rock's most successful bands consist of striking and colourful personalities, not least the Stranglers. So let's find out more about four of the most oddly matched individuals that comprised and drove them as a band with attitude, consistency and determination. Later we'll learn about the change of the lineup as it stands now. Hugh Coomer, of course, left the band in 1990 after 15 years to pursue solo interests. Jacques, referred to as Jean or JJ, is unpredictable, moody and outgoing in equal degrees, and attracted much of the media attention in the 1970s and female following too. His passion for martial arts permeates the way he thinks, dresses and even moves on stage. JJ also had a reputation for using that karate in numerous band confrontations. So has his approach to people changed now?
Respect for people, yeah. And the way, I mean, I used to, if anyone looked at me sideways, that was it, 10, 15 years ago, you know, so, boom, woof, which is really crazy, you know, really silly way to behave.
JJ's relationship with Hugh was perhaps the key to the attitude and aggression in their music. Sometimes, though, like any marriage, the road could get tough.
I can remember the last row I was in Rome when I put him through a wall, you know. So behave yourself. So, I mean, one of the reasons why the Stranglers lasted was I think Hugh and I had 4 rows in 15 years. You know, so obviously...
So all the rumours about you and him rowing all the time was not true?
No. Were there rumours about that?
Yeah, well,
There's a bit of a competitive edge between us.
Yeah, I think that was probably the secret of the formula. You know, a lot of writing partnerships based on that. Definitely.
He's very talented here.
but things had just kind of naturally come to an end, really, then?
Well, yeah, they did. I mean, artistically and I'm afraid humanly as well.
As the band's other frontman, main singer and lyricist, Hugh Coomer took most of the remaining attention. Also moody and unpredictable, his thinking is sometimes unorthodox and anarchic, though his genteel rural lifestyle reflects a guarded introvert.
Well, a good magician doesn't reveal his tricks. Sometimes I feel open, sometimes I feel introverted.
Do you think that because you were the Stranglers, who had, I mean, a very notorious reputation, people were always daunted when they met you and then were surprised?
Not always, no. Some people are and some people aren't. You have your private personality and your public personality. You only allow the public are only allowed to a certain, you know, that's what they pay for and that's what they get. I just find it very hard to put words to the way I feel. My girlfriend tells me this all the time. But then, if I could, then I probably wouldn't write songs. So, you know, so I think that's a pretty good swap, you know. I probably have more difficulty talking to someone personally, individually, than en masse.
So was his closeness with JJ like that of a brother?
Yeah, that went on for a very long time, yeah. Some days we got on, some days we didn't, you know. Just like I didn't always get on with Jet, and I didn't always get on with Dave, and Dave didn't always get on with Jet. And these are really home truths when you're working a lot of time very intimately with people. You're not going to get on with them all the time.
Have you always wanted to be taken seriously because of your roots?
Well, I don't want myself to be taken seriously, but I want what I do to be taken seriously, of course, yeah. But I think no one who writes music and makes a living out of it wants their music to be considered a joke. I mean, it's not joke music, you know.
Having left the Stranglers and opting for a more secluded life, does Hugh miss not being in the limelight?
I get recognised more now than I ever did before.
Really?
Buses, trains, shops, greengrocer shops. Women wanted me to have my photograph taken. I was buying oranges.
Almost a generation older than the other three, Jet Black,
Who was born Brian Duffy,
has charisma that matches his burly figure. When no sense prevailed, his was the voice of reason, having no time for the trappings of rock stardom. Jet's interests mirror his personality too, cooking, gardening and DIY being his forte, as well as being the band's historian.
And I turned away from music for 5 or 6 years, and I was interested in making a living. When I suddenly turned back and looked at music again, I suddenly thought to myself, what these guys are doing is so easy. It must be easy to do something like this, but even better, you know, more interesting. It wasn't until I met the right people that really manifested itself in a type of music that perhaps you could describe was typified on our first album. The trouble with our perception in this country of a lot of reviewers is that we're a bunch of lunatics, you know, and ageing punk upstarts. We're delighted if somebody wants to come along and do a critique on our music. We think that's perfectly valid. But if they want to do a critique on our lifestyle and our personal lives and our personalities, that's quite a different thing. And we've taken a lot of that over the years, and one or two in the band have taken exception to it, you know. But as you've discovered for yourself, the reality is that when we're approached by intelligent people with intelligent questions, they get intelligent answers. And it's only when we're approached by people who are looking for some explosive gutter reaction that we give it to them, because, you know, what is more appropriate for the gutter press than gutter dialogue? So that is where you get the dichotomy between what we really are and what we appear to be.
Of all the Stranglers, least is known about Dave. A very quiet, private, enigmatic person, he has always been one to spend hours solving crossword puzzles and playing electronic games kept in an almost umbilical black leather bag.
You seem very mathematical, you're very logical.
No, that does, yeah.
Is that you?
Me, yeah. I love messing around on computers, games, handheld things. I carry a Game Boy on the road.
I thought
I
you
love
might.
gadgets,
I was going to ask you about that.
I love gadgets. At home, most of the time, I'm messing around with the computers.
There also seems to be no aggression in him.
I am definitely the quiet one. I normally only do interviews for example, keyboard magazines or flight magazines or computer magazines, because my three main hobbies as such.
Were you a stabilising influence on the other members during those tougher times in the 70s when things weren't always good?
Not consciously. I mean, I may have been, but I mean, we've always had ups and downs. Should we say I tried to be, but no, I try to remain calm, but I do sometimes flare up, and I go from one extreme to the other. They're very rare, but you know, I can yell and scream with the best of them if necessary. Yeah. But I try not to, but it happens. If you're stuck in a situation that you feel is becoming intolerable, you know, you can say a few things. If nothing happens, I will eventually scream and shout and rave and rant and walk out, you know, or somebody else will walk out. It depends who's winning. Yeah. But not very often. Not often at all. I disagree a lot with the press, as I say, but I didn't think we were punks as such. As I said earlier, we knew wave, yes, we're not punks in the day, so they could call me an old punk now. Fine, so what? I know I wasn't. I'm old now, I'm over 40, yeah, most of us are.
So what did Dave make of the competitive edge between Hugh and JJ?
I think it's rivalry. I mean, the push forwards. If two songwriters agreed totally, you've really only got one songwriter, haven't you? You've only got the one input. So the old days, from what I remember, it used to work if one had written the song mainly, the other one will write the lyrics, or one will write the lyrics and the other one will sing it or something. They tried that for a while. We're four opposite poles who together were four, should we say, who together made the Stranglers. Everyone was totally different, really. Their own individual pastimes, you know, their own hobbies, their own outlook on life, virtually their own religious viewpoints, I would imagine.
You're listening to Rock and Roll According to the Men in Black, with myself, Dave Mason. As the mid-70s pub rock scene gathered steam, the Stranglers found a vehicle for their R&B flavoured music. Even at this stage, they stood out as mavericks, but some compared them with the Doors. Were they an influence? Here's Jet Black again.
Not so much the Doors, although JJ had always been very keen on the Doors. I don't think Dave really knew much about their music, and yet the early critics used to say that we sounded like the Doors, and I think that the main reason for that was Dave's early keyboard parts.
Walk On By.
Yes, and yet it certainly wasn't the case that he was influenced to that extent, because he wasn't at that time really familiar with their stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think that was more accidental than intentional.
It's difficult to say, being on the inside of it. I mean, my playing in the old days was very Manzarek-like, yes, Doors keyboard player, but entirely accidentally. But the only tracks I did actually know before I joined the Stranglers by the Doors were the two big hits they had, which Like My Fire and Riders in the Storm. I didn't consciously try and emulate him.
Ratus Norvegicus being the first album, recorded in 6 days. How did you manage that, to get that piece of product? That's a classic album now, isn't it?
I can't imagine how we did it now, knowing how long it takes to record these days. But I can tell you one thing, that by the time we came to record that, we'd been playing practically every night for about 3 or 4 years, and we were so good at what we were doing that I can believe that we did do it in 6 days. We just went in there, mics were put in front of us, and we just played.
Together, almost?
Yeah, almost pretty much together, with just 1 or 2 solo overdubs afterwards. And
that's actually quite rare, isn't it, in recording?
Well, I mean, it wasn't so rare then, but it is now. Techniques were still a little bit primitive then. We've come a long way in the last decade, but we just rattled these off so quickly we could play them in our sleep almost, these songs. We've been playing them for years, night after night after night, and it all came pretty easy to us. I think the biggest obstacle was nerves, you know, to actually be in there doing it for real for the first time. I think there was a lot of nerves on those early albums, but somehow it all sort of hung together, you know.
Have you always had that much control?
Well, by and large, yes, because if you're not working with, it's not working out with the producer, then you stop working together. But there have been 1 or 2 moments when it hasn't worked. Like Martin Rushent was the name you were probably thinking of there. We finally reached a point when Martin didn't see our way of doing things anymore and decided he didn't want to work with us anymore. So that was the end of that.
When you were first signed back in 1976, United Artists and so on, and since then, of course, with the change to CBS, were the Stranglers in a situation, in a bargaining position, where you were signed as rock stars with big record deals, so you all ended up doing pretty well out of it?
No. I think, from what I remember, when we signed the original deal, we got the massive sum of something like 40,000 for it, or maybe less, not a lot. I mean, which was news in those days, I suppose. We have had periods of near bankruptcy before now, yeah. Because the way we work, we don't take, oh, you get a massive sum, let's have a quarter or fifth each or whatever. We never do that. I mean, it all goes into a fund. We draw a standing wage each week. Occasionally you had a successful tour, you take a few thousand bonus or something, pay tax on it, or the tax will be paid before we get it. And then, fine, you get holiday money. Easier for us, really. You haven't got to manage your money so much. You know you've got X amount coming in each week, so you can budget like anybody.
Famous for their infamy and pranks, both the Stranglers themselves and their music attracted controversy and made them a consistent feature of the rock gossip columns in the late 70s. Some of their videos were banned, and as their following grew, so did the notoriety, in some cases resulting in council bannings. But were they deliberately outrageous? Jet.
Well, we were controversial by nature. It was just, it always seemed natural to us to do something that didn't look quite right. We wanted to be different. We wanted to do everything different, and we didn't want to belong to any sort of musical clubs or conventions. And it resulted in us getting tarred with the same brush as everybody else, which meant we got banned all over the place. But that in itself had its good side to it.
Why did those council bannings occur?
Well, because they read these people believe what they read in the papers. I mean, you'd see front page headlines about violence and atrocities at concerts and obnoxious behaviour from teenagers, and people would say, well, it's all the Stranglers' fault, they sound like they're guilty. And people actually believe all that stuff,
We did a lot of great stuff, and we got away with a lot of, I won't say dross, but very weird stuff. I'd say weird. I mean, I played some of the old albums, and some of that stuff is so weird, I don't know how we got away with it.
Will you listen to it now?
Well, I did. I was trying to find, because I'm going to be doing some Stranglers numbers when I go out on tour, and I was trying to find some suitable numbers, and some of the stuff I'd forgotten how weird it was, and we actually released it. Can't believe it.
The Meninblack album.
No, that is quite commercially, that is quite accessible, actually. That's one of the most accessible albums, I think. But some of the stuff on La Folie, some of the stuff on that is so weird.
There was a period around the time of the Meninblack album that the Stranglers had a near obsession with the colour black and the subject of UFO visitations. And it's this area that Hugh has particular difficulty in talking about.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I don't particularly want to talk about it anymore.
And it was the fact that in a period of about no more than 18 months, which is the part of our lives we were working on the Men in Black, that all these things happened. Like people dropping dead, studios blowing up, cars exploding. It was the fact that it all happened so close together in a small period of time. That is what was so convincing about it.
You actually feel that there was a particular energy around the band that was a negative energy?
Very negative energy, yeah. It's very easy to attract negative energy, and it's a spiral. And once you get into that, it's very difficult to get out of it.
About 2 years after that whole incident, the people that we'd made at Bristol at the BBC, we'd made a documentary with them about the Men in Black and the colour black and all that stuff. And they were very much into the subject matter, which they'd made as young producers and engineers at the BBC. And some years later they thought, that was a great subject, let's go back and revisit it, maybe we could improve upon it. Well, I met up with them at a leaving party at the BBC about 2 years after the Men in Black whole thing had happened, and they were telling me this story, and they said, let's go down to the archives, pull out the film and see if we can re-edit it and put some more stuff in. And you know what, it's the only film that's ever gone missing from the BBC library. It's vanished.
If we accept that if we're one planet in one solar system and we don't know how many solar systems there are, mathematically there's got to be the possibility of life as we know it, let alone life as we don't know it. There must be a possibility. And until they find the missing link, I'm going to personally remain convinced that humanity as we know it was interfered with, and that's why we are human beings as we are.
You weren't going out to be notorious or blasphemous or anything specifically in those natures because of what you believed.
I wouldn't use any of those words, I'd just say we were trying to be honest. Whereas people wrap certain things up in niceties, we always kind of spoke the truth. And so as a result, when we used lyrics that weren't a million miles away from the language you hear in the streets these days, we thought that was quite an honest observation about the world we live in, and yet people called us sexist for using certain lines in lyrics, you know, in Peaches, you know, referring to women the way we did in those early songs. It was just the way you hear guys talking about women in the streets, and our songs were always observations about the world we live in.
You're listening to Rock and Roll according to the Men in Black, with myself, Dave Mason. The formerly known Chiddingfold Chokers and Guildford Stranglers were always labelled punks. Quite simply, they weren't. Jet Black recalls the early days.
I remember the first gig at the Hope and Anchor in Islington. We played to one person, and we pulled him up a chair in the front and got him a crate of beers, and we played to him all night long. And in those early days, all those people that called themselves punks used to come and watch us. And it wasn't until 2 or 3 years later then suddenly this punk boom, you know, exploded, and everyone said we were a punk band. We were nothing of the sort. We were the guys who were doing all the way through all that what we'd always been doing from the beginning anyway.
You just got caught up in it, really.
Well, we did, and it was very useful, and it was it had problems associated with it.
I think we worked harder before we were caught up with the punk thing.
Do you have fond memories of even the bad times that you had with being caught up in the scene which caused one council bannings, even a fight between yourselves, the Clash and the Sex Pistols in London at one point, and the Finchley Boys and so on?
I try and avoid nostalgia. I think nostalgia is a very dangerous emotion. It's a self-preserving emotion from the human being to try and soften down the things that hurt when they happen. No, I don't. I'm not fond of bad moments. Bad moments are bad moments, and that's it. You know, so just forget them and get on with making some good ones. You know.
But you can't blank out 15 years with a band.
But there weren't 15 years of bad moments.
But no.
There was the odd bad moment every year or something. But you get that in any kind of path you take. So you've just got to just blank them out. You know.
The Sex Pistols in the 70s actually made a quote and referred to you as short-haired hippies. I mean, was that unfair considering you are effectively godfathers of punk and new wave?
Well, I think the Sex Pistols would use any possible expletive to outrage whoever they spoke about. They used the kind of language that best suited their image, and so if they called us, what do they call us? Aging hippies.
Short-haired.
Short-haired hippies. Well, they're probably right from their perspective,
Yeah.
But I can tell you one thing, that all these guys in those bands, like there was the Damned, there was the Clash, the Pistols, all those guys used to come and watch us before they were bands. They used to come in and watch this strange band that not many people liked, with short hair and tight trousers.
Did you all play at the Rainbow in London together?
Well, we did, but that was at the end of our early innings in London.
John Ellison was a part of the same scene in the 1970s.
For a start, you should ask yourself the question, were there actually any punk bands? There might have been one or two, and everyone else was like got sucked into that whole particular movement. No one was going to turn down a chance of getting record deals. It was very convenient to call yourself a punk band at one time because it meant you were probably likely to get a deal. It was pretty obvious that the Stranglers were not like the Pistols and were not like the Clash, and that they were off in their own direction. If there is a definition of punk music, it was nothing like the classic definition of punk music. The only similarity they had was that they played their spirit was aggressive and the spirit was energetic.
By 1979, punk in its truest form had had its day, and many critics thought the Stranglers had had theirs too. But proving their ability to produce melodic pop, Duchess Broke New Ground was their 8th consecutive hit, and speculation followed over the link with royalty.
Well, I've seen 1 or 2 press reports that claim that certain members of the royal family have been heard discussing the Stranglers, but then again I have to add immediately that I don't believe much I read in the papers.
And also, does it relate to Duchess, of course?
Yeah, well, does it? Who knows?
So Duchess from the Raven album, it was just one of the songs that we wrote for the Raven record, and it just turned out the way it turned out. I don't really see a Duchess as being a pivotal point. Maybe my memories getting dodgy. Writing isn't so as purposeful as people like to look at it in retrospect, I think.
Was that true about Hugh's alleged candid relationship with a member of the aristocracy at the time?
Well, a high-class socialite, yes. How far up the aristocratic ladder she was, I couldn't really say. But far enough to be known colloquially as the Duchess.
The dawn of a new decade didn't prove to be in any way auspicious for the Stranglers. In fact, 1980 echoed one disaster after another. Effectively, it was the year of incarceration for the band. Spring saw the release of Duchess's follow-up Bear Cage, coupled with Hugh's appeal against a drugs bust being dismissed in court, some said to make a public example of him. The result was 5 weeks in Pentonville prison and an anticipated loss for the band of £200,000 in dishonoured gigs. Even their manager at the time thought it was the end for the Stranglers. Here's Jet.
Well, he was a naughty boy, and, you know, he claimed somebody gave him this. And people do give you things, you know, when you're leaving concerts. And yes, he went to prison for 5-6 weeks, and it reformed him.
Well, people said that you being in prison for 5 weeks out of 8 changed you, reformed you, did it?
No, not at all.
You came back out and carried on?
Oh, yeah. For a few years.
Because Golden Brown was written after that, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that was about your own experience, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it didn't teach me any lessons, no.
Then came the Rainbow benefit gigs, which required a stand-in for Hugh Coomer. They also marked the start of a long relationship between John Ellis and the Stranglers.
When Hugh got banged up, JJ phoned up, the management at that time phoned up and said, do you want to come and play on this Rainbow thing, which was the 2 nights at the Rainbow. I actually played both those gigs, and I actually was on stage all the time. I was the guitarist that took over Hugh's role, and everyone else came along to do a couple of numbers each, but I was actually on stage all the time. Which is not what the bootleg says. The bootleg completely ignores the fact that I was there, but they were fantastic because it's very, very I can't think of many concerts where so many musicians come along and play one band's material, really. It wasn't we were doing lots of different people's material, it was all the Stranglers stuff. It was Billy Idol, Ian Dury, Toyah Willcox, Steve Hillage, a real range of people. Steve Hillage, Wilco Johnson, Steel Pulse were there, Jake Burns from Stiff Little Fingers. There was just so many people there from different types of bands. It wasn't just punk bands or new age bands. It was real across the board, and everyone really enjoyed it. The first night was fantastic. The vibe in the first night was absolutely brilliant.
Who Wants the World was ironically recorded just 2 days before Hugh's imprisonment and released soon after he was on May the 30th, 1980. The band then went on to record in Munich for the Meninblack album, followed by the fateful European tour, which ended in a world headline-grabbing incident on Friday, June the 20th, known affectionately as the Nice Affair. JJ and Jet pick up the full story.
And in fact, we were vindicated last year when the mayor of Nice, who was involved in the whole thing, a bloke called Jacques Médecin, actually finally did a runner from Nice and is now living happily in Argentina.
With all their money, probably?
With all the money of the city of Nice.
Right. And is he the guy that banged you up?
Yeah. He's the guy who insisted on us being banged up, and sort of his wife had been nicking the money from the parking meters in Nice, which is a big
That's brilliant.
such a small town. It's quite a big town for about 10 years, and he was mayor of Nice, and his father was mayor of Nice before him. There's like all these streets called Jacques Médecin Street and Avenue Jean Médecin. It's a whole gangster dynasty. At the time, we were saying this is a whole setup, and we're being framed, and there's a whole political thing behind this. And everyone's saying, no, he's wonderful. He's done so much good for Nice. He's cleaned up the streets. Aren't any young people in the streets anymore?
Did you encourage people to basically riot in any way then?
No, we said, listen, no, we were screwed about by the authorities. The venue was changed the day before. They finally found us a place to play in Nice, which was a glass amphitheatre. In the universe.
Nice one.
Yeah, completely glass. It wasn't any by the time we finished playing.
It was just a frame, I should think, wasn't it?
It was just a frame, yeah. I was just everything went wrong. Everything went drastically wrong.
And we didn't know it at the time, but we got caught up in a very political situation in Nice. It wasn't till some 2 years later that we really found out what had really been going on there. Now, we arrived in France and we were playing a tour. We'd played perhaps a dozen dates by the time we got to Nice. The local newspaper had written a front page story describing how this obnoxious punk band from England called the Stranglers had been touring France, and wherever we go there's trouble, there's violence, there's riots and mayhem. Now, when the university authorities saw this, they thought, hang on a minute, these guys are playing here tomorrow night, we're going to do something about this. They did the only thing they felt they could do and not find themselves at the end of a lawsuit. And what they did was they made electricity unavailable to us. Now, we have certain requirements when we put on a concert. When the crew got there, they found every obstacle possible put in front of them. They wouldn't let them bring the truck into the grounds, and they had to move tons of equipment up and down staircases, all kinds of obstacles. They wouldn't let them access to the electricity. They went out into the town to try and hire generators. They brought generators up to the university, and the university said, you can't bring those big machines in here, it'll melt the concrete. I mean, it was really comical stuff.
Outrageous.
And then it was like, where are the dressing rooms? I'm sorry, you can't get into them, they're all locked, we've lost the key, and all this kind of nonsense. But what actually happened when it came to the concert in the evening, we came along and thought, well, at the least we've got to go on in front of these people and show at least we're trying to do this gig, you know. So we went on, and exactly the same thing happened, you know, that the power caved in, all the lights went out, everything shut down. We said, hold on, we'll try and fix it, you know, and they tried to fix it. And we did this like 3 times, and then it was a disaster. We couldn't carry on. And so I went to the microphone and explained what had happened, and we said, we don't know why they're doing this, go and ask them, not us. And then Jojo translated this into French. And as soon as this announcement was finished, they just ran amok and wrecked the university. And there were these guys running along with these huge galvanised steel barricades, smashing in plate glass windows. Every building in the place was wrecked.
You guys got out okay, did you?
Well, no, we were actually just sitting there at the back of the stage watching it, thinking, what on earth is going on here? You know, we thought, we know the French are crazy, but this is ridiculous, you know. And then I remember sitting there and thinking, well, something good's got to come out of this. I mean, this is going so positively in one direction that, you know, every action has a reaction, if you know what I mean. So at this point in France, we were almost unknown. I mean, the concerts we were playing to about, 50 or 60 people. And then after this had happened, you know, we were front page news everywhere. The News of the World made us front page story here, and you know, it was quite useful.
It worked.
I mean, the moral of the story is, you know, if you want to advance your career, you know, get involved in some sort of riot. But I'm not recommending that.
How long were you in prison for?
Well, what happened was the police came along in the middle of the night and started questioning us, and then they carted us off to prison and said we were going to be charged with inciting a riot. And we were in jail for a week, and what happens in France, as you probably know, is you're guilty until proved innocent. And all the time this is happening, you're rotting in jail. Anyway, at the end of it, we were let out and told that we'd be coming back to stand trial, you know, some months later. Anyway, we came to trial. It was extremely funny. If it weren't so serious, it was a bit nerve-wracking, because they were holding the threat of, I think, 8 or 10 years in jail for this. And anyway, we found ourselves in court eventually. It was quite funny when we came into the court, because the prosecution had 2 barristers. There was this row of, I think, 4 or 5 judges, and everybody, all the clerks, all the press, everybody was dressed in black. And then we walk in and we're all dressed in black as well. I remember thinking to myself, hang on, they're going to think we're taking the piss here, you know?
You're like all Stranglers fans. It was like a Stranglers gig.
So, in fact, what actually happened was they found the university and us jointly liable, and we were both fined the same amount, which is an outrage in itself. But we had to pay this huge fine, and we were given a suspended jail sentence, which of course isn't a sentence at all.
Are you welcome back there now?
Oh God, the first thing we did was we rushed back there and played there, and it was just like a sensation, you know. I remember that they called out the troops, all the riot police and everything. There were tanks in the streets. So they were expecting riots. Of course there was never any riot, you know. There was just a load of people having a great time, you know. It was a very strange phenomenon.
If controversy was part of their style, then so was the art of springing surprises, and the Men in Black's trump card was to be the biggest surprise of all. Released from the album La Folie, Golden Brown became a turning point in the Stranglers' career,
achieving worldwide success. But back in 1981, John Foley was working for EMI in Australia as a record plugger.
The weird thing about it was myself and a lot of other promotions people who worked for EMI in Australia in various states were called into an A&R meeting to be played the new Stranglers single. And we were sitting around saying, right, the A&R guy came in, flown specifically over from the UK so that we could all hear it for the first time. And this song comes on, you know, through the stereo system, Golden Brown, which was nothing like a Stranglers song that we'd known, that we'd ever worked before. And the looks that were going around that room was just saying, shit, I mean, this is going to be tough. Bear in mind, we have to go into radio stations like yours. We had serious doubts. The first radio station I took it into was 6NOW 96 FM in Perth, in Western Australia, which was like a West Coast station, very California kind of attitude. And we just thought, yeah, I just can't see us getting this playlisted. And we took it in. Then again, it's lessons learned by the industry. You're not as good as you always think you are. And played it to the what they would call music director, their head of music here, and he loved it. I mean, he thought great, and it was on the playlist within 10 minutes. I think we had to send out for extra copies. But strange that the key people within their record company in Australia, and myself included, and I've admitted this to them at the time, we thought, Golden Brown, no chance. This is buried. We'll have to find another single off the album. But we were wrong.
Picking up an Ivor Novello Award, the track also became contentious due to its drug-related lyrics. Hugh Cornwell.
I know it was about lots of different things, not just about drugs. There was loads of other things in there too. Just that all the words weren't very well together. The subject, I had about 4 subjects. There was a girl I was going out with at the time that was in there as well. And then there was the drugs and there was a few subjects, and it all moulded together. So it wasn't just about heroin. It's lots of other things too. That's just the thing everyone picked up on.
Well, that was inspired by certain observations about, again, the world we lived and moved in. We didn't see anything wrong writing a song that inspired by the topic of drugs. I mean, the drug world is more evident to us today than it ever was. Is there some reason why you shouldn't write about drugs?
The song itself started, I think it was part of, from the album before, I think Second Coming. Jet and I had sat down and wrote an idea for a song, which was Second Coming. Then the others came in and worked on it, and there was pieces of it, should we say, became redundant. So come the next album, we thought we'd revive it.
Was it democratic? Was it always a 4-way split?
What, writing-wise? No. I mean, most people accept the fact that I wrote most of the lyrics, and that John and I were the ones that initialised ideas for songs. And in the vast majority of cases, that's what happened. And I'm sure no one would disagree with that.
And it was only a simple, basic idea. I can't remember what it was now. So Jet was saying, try it, dum, 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 dum. And I added to that and built up the basic riff. And I honestly can't remember now how the time thing came in, but that was during that. Jet and I were sitting there with a piano or something. And that's the way it came out. So the other two came in, and the song was written, arranged, and everything. Well, no lyrics, obviously, etc. And Hugh just added that. It didn't hit anybody instantly. It was different. It was certainly different for us, let's face it. But I suppose it's the quirk, the catchiness, 15 4-bits in the middle, etc. Caught people's eye. Or maybe they just remembered it because of that missing beat.
We never wrote a song saying, hey, everybody take drugs, it's great. We just wrote about a song that was inspired by the notion that is so important to so many people in the world, you know, drugs. We never said they were a good thing, we just said there they are, you know.
Was the band heavily caught up in it because of the rock and roll scene at that time as well?
Well, we weren't heavily caught up in it at all, you know. It was just one direction of life that we observed and wrote about.
Exactly. Oh, and they always are. I always write about things I know about and I've had experience of, because that's when the things mean something, and that's when people... they mean something to other people because they can identify with these ideas. Yeah, definitely. I never write about things I don't know about. Don't think most people don't.
I mean, all the people in our songs, I think almost all the people in our songs are real people, and most of the incidents described in our lyrics are real events, and our work is really a reflection of our life. We always had our lighter moments. I mean, people always assume, people that don't know our music, that our music is always aggressive, and that's not true. Sometimes it's aggressive, sometimes it's not. We reflect on the lighter side of life as well as the the seamier side of life.
Strange Little Girl epitomised the subtlety of some of the Stranglers' works and was their last recording for EMI in 1982. The relationship had turned sour to such an extent that the band took pleasure in pointing out that the song was on an original demo tape rejected by EMI in 1975. Fortunately for all concerned, it was yet another top 10 hit.